Oh, hi everyone and welcome back to the channel. Well, it was all going so well, wasn't it, for the Super 6? It was all going too well almost. So not long I've ridden it now and we've uncovered the first quirk or problem with this bike. So everyone, welcome to the Cannondale QC lab. And today, children, we're going to be looking at the headset, which I've read a lot of bad things about online many years ago now, but I thought they'd have fixed it. But they haven't. Very, very disappointing to have this problem on a brand new bike of this money. So let's have a look and see what the steerer tube, what it actually has to do, and how it's constrained, how is it fixed, how does it offer steering and geometry. So the steerer tube has to do two things. It has to offer steering, an axis for steering, and it has to keep geometry. So basically it needs to be pretty fixed in the head tube. Now your steerer tube needs to be fixed in 5 of the 6 degrees of freedom. It needs to be fixed forward and back, it needs to be fixed left and right, and it also needs to be constrained axially, so up and down. You don't want your fork moving up and down. It also needs to not rotate that way, it needs to not rotate that way, but obviously we want the steerer tube to rotate that way. So it's fixed in 5 of the 6 degrees of freedom, and the only degree of freedom it's allowed to rotate in is that one. But everyone, ladies and gentlemen, this Cannondale, my new bike, must be a limited edition, because this steerer tube only is fixed in 4 degrees of freedom. That's right, it can steer, but it can also pitch forward and back. Yeah, special limited edition Cannondale can change trail of the fork, head tube angle, everything. And it's because, ladies and gentlemen, the upper bearing seat is not round. It doesn't even fit the bearing. Now, maybe Cannondale left it unround with a gap around the bearing because they thought, oh well, we don't want to over constrain the shaft. We'll set the radial position of the shaft on the bottom bearing, and then we'll almost leave this top bearing floating, so when you compress it all together axially, it self-aligns. Now that is a way of constraining a shaft. With preload you can do that, but the problem here is that the preload you can get onto this isn't enough to fix the radial location or the planar location of that top bearing. So under really heavy load, now I'm talking, you don't feel this by rocking the brake forward and backwards like you would on a really loose headset, but if you're really heavy braking or you're standing up on the bars, and I do mean like heavy, real lightweights out there or 150 watt prawns probably wouldn't get this, but there is some rocking and there is some kind of stick-slip shunting of this top bearing under really heavy load, and no matter how tight you do up the top cap and preload everything, I cannot get rid of it. And it is because this top bearing, the seat is not round. Look at the gap around that bearing. It's almost oval. I've measured it with a bore mic and it's ovalized. So there's a lot of gap at the front and the back, but not much at the sides. And I just don't know how they could have got that so wrong. How many years have they been making carbon bikes that there's either two scenarios here. They either felt unconfident that they could align the two bearing cups, so they left the top one bigger, or they just couldn't make it round or the right size, and that's just inexcusable. And how did it even get through QC? It is ridiculous that I'm having to deal with this problem on a bike that cost this much, well, should have cost this much basically. So when I had this problem, I started to inquire about what the hell was going on. And yes, before you say anything, the steerer doesn't bottom out on the top cap when you screw it down. Okay, I am getting a lot of axial loading in it. Took everything off. First thing I noticed, plastic compression ring in the top bearing. What the hell are they using a plastic compression ring for? Because when that wears, which it will do, it's plastic, or it might even shrink, there might be some dimensional changes because it's plastic. That's going to need, if it does wear internally up against the steerer, which is not even tight in, it's going to need more axial load to compress the bearing, and then once you've already set the axial load by doing up the stem bolts, you've lost that adjustment, so it's always going to need to be adjusted and added more compression. So why are we using a crappy plastic compression ring, not a very light alloy one? I mean, I've never had a problem with an alloy one ever. Why are we using this? It's not. It's a wanky fit on that. Look how loose it is on that shaft. So I'll probably, you know, when that is done up properly with the axial load, it's probably not even compressing anything. It's too loose. Okay, so that's the second problem, apart from the top bearing cup not being round. That's the second problem. Now, where is the top cap to finish off my rant? Bear with me, it's here somewhere. Right, I'll just go and get it, it's over there. Wait a minute. So I took the top cap off. First thing I found, well, this is supposed to be like a dust seal, isn't it? Like a top cap, that's what they used to be used for. So they used to have an O-ring or a wiper seal on the inside there to stop shit getting down the steer tube and inside the head tube. But I don't know, what the brand's suddenly sort of done away with that now. There's no seal, or some of them have a wiper seal on the bottom, which mates up against the top of the head tube, and some of them used to have like a little O-ring in the middle that would slide down nicely over the steer, and my Giant still has that. But what's this? It's just a piece of aluminium. It does nothing. It literally does nothing. You could clamp the stem straight down on that compression ring if you wanted to. This is just a spacer. But no offence, but Cannondale, they couldn't even make a spacer. Like, this is brand new. Now look, what can you notice about that? Anything? Oh yeah, look, that huge gouge on the bottom of it. So that hasn't been working as a spacer for the inner race, has it? That hasn't been transferring axial load to the inner race, has it? No. That's been gouging itself out on the outer race of the bearing. If that's pressing down, when I'm loading the top cap, if that's pressing down on the outer race of the bearing, how am I adding any compression to the inner race? That's clearly been rubbing. You can see the witness mark all around it. And I thought, well, oh yeah, maybe there's the thin shim missing from the top of this compression ring, because you know, some bikes above the compression ring you get a very thin foil shim to stack that up off the head tube, because the depth of the cups isn't controlled very well in QC, so they just add some shims to move that up to make sure this doesn't bottom on the head tube. But I rang the local Cannondale dealer, said, no, sir, your bike is not supposed to have any shims in the headset. You just use the top cap. Well, first of all, I don't even need to use this top cap because it doesn't seal anything. It's just an aluminium spacer. But they haven't even designed it properly, because they've designed it with a curve. It's not actually mating on the compression ring, it's mating on the outside of the bearing, so I'm not getting any compression on the inner race, so it's completely pointless. This is so bad. Do you know, I'm not even going to attempt to go back to Cannondale on this, because they'll just fob me off with some bullshit and we won't get anywhere. So what am I going to do to fix this? Well, I'm going to get some shims for this top compression ring so it mates on the inner portion of here, right? So I can actually add compression to the bearings. Second one, I'm going to replace this crappy plastic one with an aluminium one, if I can find one the right size. I probably can't. You've got to match the taper of the top bearing. Sorry about the focus. You've got to match the taper of the top bearing to get one to work properly. And then what am I going to do with the frame bearing cups that aren't round? Well, I'm just going to buy some very thin shim steel and space that bearing out properly in the frame, so it's a nice tight fit in the frame. And like, I've had other bikes, like my Giant, it's almost a nice push fit into the frame and it locates really well. And I've never had bearing play or bearing cut play on any other bike I've ever owned. And considering this is probably one with the latest manufacturing date, it's pretty shocking to see how bad it is. Anyway, that's my rant about Cannondale headsets. I've read lots of horror stories about them online. You know, the serial killer is still out there. The horror story still goes on. Cheers for watching. Be warned.